So, as we look at early human society and this shift towards what we now call civilization, we have to look at the Neolithic, or sometimes referred to as the agricultural revolution. So, the Neolithic revolution begins roughly following the end of the last ice age, or about 10,000 BC. Generally speaking, it's understood that farming was something that didn't have to happen, but it did occur in different places at different times. So the stereotype is that the area in which it developed is known as the Fertile Crescent, due to its shape along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And you can see it clearly on the map where you have the Tigris and then the Euphrates, a little bit west of it. The concept of Mesopotamia is a Greek phrase, which means land between the rivers being Tigris and the Euphrates. But it also occurs along the eastern Mediterranean Sea, which we see as the Canaan, and then along the Nile River, which is labeled as Egypt. This was probably an accident, where humans began to drop pieces of wild grain, but then they noticed that this grain produced more crops, so they ultimately just continued the process. Now, when you look at the map, we understand the global implications of the Neolithic Revolution. So, independent development of agriculture, where it happened at different times, and frankly, the crops that were grown at different times. So, once agriculture takes root, most places now enjoy a more reliable food supply. So, you don't necessarily have to worry as much about eating. But what you eat is not nearly as diverse as those who continued hunting and gathering, so there is a trade-off. What you also see is domesticated plant or animal. Specifically, the domestication of pack animals goes hand in hand with the Neolithic Revolution because these animals could be used for labor that was far too heavy for humans. So, you look at the southwest steppes in Asia, the horse, cattle in the Sahara, pigs, sheep in the Fertile Crescent. Domesticated animals are certainly part of the process when we look at this shift to farming. Now, characteristics of the agricultural revolution, yes, fire was a game changer, but ultimately, this is the first significant change in the history of all of mankind. So, as part of the process, dwellings, used to be easily set up and dismantled. Think tents or yurts that you might see in modern Mongolia. Now, you can make them with more permanent materials. Now, domesticated animals provide labor, but they are used for their milk, their wool, and furs, and you can also use the manure as fertilizer. Now, with farming also comes the need for specialized tasks. So we get this concept of division of labor. And additionally, this notion of patriarchy emerges as the relative gender equality that was present in foraging societies is going to begin to disappear. So in farming communities, laborers began to focus on a specific task or job. And this means that the muscles are being worked the same way over and over again. So this will lead to stress on their muscles and bones. Now, not everyone is needed now to forage or hunt because of a more reliable food supply, and most will spend their days laboring in the fields. So a lot of people are going to begin to lose their hunting skills, and skill egalitarianism is going to begin to disappear. Now, most consequentially, when humans domesticated animals, they began to live side by side with them, and thus diseases began to jump from animals to humans. With more humans now living in close proximity to one another, these diseases are also transmitted from human to human, which unfortunately provides us with humanity's greatest killer. So evidence of pottery and baskets will date to about 6,000 BC, and they ultimately would have been for the practical purposes of carrying and storing excess food. Technologically speaking, we find bronze is discovered about 2,000 years later, and the island of Cyprus had ample supplies of copper and tin to produce this material. Its creation required blast furnaces and massive amounts of firewood, and large portions of the earth are going to be deforested for this process. Now, between 4 and 3000 BC, writing also begins to emerge. So exchanges and history can be recorded, and eventually rules and laws can be uniform for all. I mean, farming makes the development and enhancement of each of these possible. Now, as we saw on the map, there was this idea of pastoralism. There are some areas that are simply not conducive to settled agriculture, so pastoralism begins to develop. Now, pastoralism is similar to farming in that domesticated animals do provide a stable food supply, but they move from place to place rather than staying in one spot. Horses encouraged the spread of pastoralism in Central Asia. You find camels in North Africa and the deserts of the Middle East. But realistically, this doesn't appear to have developed in the Americas. Relations between these settled farmers and pastoralists are key in Afro-Eurasia, as both competed for similar land and resources, but they also exchanged technology, ideas, products, and also people, furthering this development towards and of human civilization.